What's up, y'all? So I just got a delivery, this Abu Garcia Vengeance. 50 bucks. That's really good for a baitcaster combo that can do a lot of stuff. And I thought, you know what, let me make a video real quick about 10 baits that you can fish on this combo or a combo like this. If you're interested in this or the rod or the reel, I'll just put a link in the description below. But this is a 6-4 gear ratio baitcaster. And this is a 7-foot medium heavy fast action. And both of those things are important for the type of baits that we're going to be talking about. So got to clarify that first. But this right here, 50 bucks. So I'm actually planning on doing a series where I go and fish a lot of places here in Florida. And so I'm getting tackle ready. I was doing that when this got delivered. And I'm getting stuff ready for that series. And so I thought, you know, all right, well, I'm gonna throw these couple things on this rod for sure, but what else could I throw? And next thing you know, I come up with 10 things, and I'm like, let me make a video real quick. So here we go. First things first. It says 2/0 EWG. That's extra wide gap. So 2/0 extra wide gap. The EWG stands for extra wide gap. It says offset shank worm. EWG. This is a thin wire hook, okay? And Gamakatsu has other hooks and stuff that will work. But this is a thin wire hook with a smaller rod like this that's a medium heavy. It's not heavy. It's a medium heavy fast action. I believe it's a fast action. It doesn't actually say whether it's fast action, but if I just bend the tip, I think that's fast action. And if it has a little more bend than fast action, then it will work a little better with certain techniques and a little better with other techniques. But here's the thing, the type of hook you use, the speed of your reel, the power and action of your rod, the type of line you use, the weight of your line, it all plays a factor. But first things first, we're going to talk about the 2/0 EWG because there's 4 baits that I want to fish with that. And no, it's not like I'm fishing them all the same way. No, this is 4 baits that are going to be fished differently. So first things first, let's talk about a swim bait. So you might not think a swim bait, but if we have like some little, you can't probably see that, but that's a little tungsten bullet weight, 3/16 ounce. Now you might use a different weight depending on what you're doing. And these are some bobber stoppers. These are actually pretty big ones. I have smaller ones than this, but I like to put a bobber stopper on my line and then put on a bullet weight. And then you throw on some of these hooks and you pair it with a swim bait. Now I just fished with this for the first time and some water ruined the tag. I think they're called Mayors. This is by Crush City. Now what I like about these is they have a big slit in the bottom of the bait because that extra wide gap is wide so that when the bait moves down and the hook goes in, the wider the gap, the more that bait can get out of the way and not mess up, you know, your hook sets. So when you have a slit in it, it means there's less plastic in the way, which is better for your hook sets. So that is really good. But if you're using a 3/0, you know, you could use this, the Shutter Swimmers, Ozark Trail. These are at Walmart, super cheap. Or Kitech. I haven't used these in a couple years, but when they're biting these, it's hard to beat the little Kitechs. So this is the Easy Shiner 4-inch right there. That sucker, I'm pretty sure you can Texas rig that as well, and it's thinner, so you're not going to have problems with the plastic being in the way. That's not going to be an issue. When they're biting that, that's hard to beat. So swim bait for sure. A little swim bait on a little hook like that, there's enough backbone in that rod, and that 6/4 gear ratio is nice and slow. What's one of the best tips we can give beginner anglers or even average anglers that might just be, you know, going through a slump and not catching as many fish? Slow down. It's the best tip for anglers, really, especially down here in Florida. A lot of people come down to Florida that are good in other places. They come down here and they don't do well because they got to slow down. And a 6/4 gear ratio for bait casters is slow. So it will help you slow down. Now, if you're used to using spinning reels and you're moving into bait casters, Well, 6'4" is not bad because it's faster than most spinning reels. Most spinning reels are what, 5'4" maybe, you know, something around there, or maybe even 6. Well, this is a 6'4". This is faster. So this is faster than most spinning reels. So for some of these techniques that we're going to talk about, or baits we're going to be talking about, I prefer to throw it on 7-1 or 7-5 gear ratio, but you can make it work with a 6'4". For a $50 combo, I'll make it work. You know what I mean? So next we're going to talk about stick bait. And there's a Yum Dinger. This is just a 30 pack of stick baits. You know, stick baits are also Senkos. Also on the 2-aught. So same setup. Bullet weight, you know, the bobber stopper above it, and that 2-aught, a swim bait. Now we take that off, we put on a stick bait. So we're rolling, slow rolling that swim bait, you know, and we're getting maybe a bite or two, catching a fish or two. But, you know, when we had it stopped still on the bottom was when we were actually catching fish. Well, that means you might want to go to a stick bait because a stick bait has salt in it. It's going to fall to the bottom. It's a great bait to sit on the bottom. When the bite is hard to get a bite and they're pecking at stuff, they'll taste that salt, they'll hold on to that bait, they'll eat that bait, and that's when you get them. Now, I usually do prefer a faster reel than a 6'4" for this bait. I mean, I prefer all the way up to 8-something gear ratio for a stick bait because when I'm fishing that stick bait, I'm usually moving it with the rod, not the reel. So the reel doesn't do a whole lot for me. So I'm usually just moving it with the rod. When I do set the hook, I like to reel as fast as I can. But you can make it work with a 6'4" because for years, when I was younger, when stick baits were like newer baits, I would fish with them on a spinning reel. I mean, heck, I even fished with them pretty often on a spinning reel when I fished FLW college fishing way, way long ago. Because I used to like to skip them up in little areas that I could skip them with a spinning reel. And so, yeah, you can catch them on this setup. But we're going to get away from stick baits. I could talk about stick baits all day long, but we got 10 baits to talk about, and we've only covered 2, so let's move along. What does that say? It says crawdad. The W is a little funky, but it says crawdad. So I actually just ran out of these because I've been catching them on them lately, but the one I have left is bent, and that is a Yum Christy Crawl. So that crawdad right there has been working well for me lately, and the reason I've been catching them on that is because I've been throwing up in areas where I usually like to throw the stick bait, but there's a lot of gunk. There's a lot of settlement. There's a lot of, every time I'm bringing that stick bait back to me, I'm picking stuff off of it because the weight of that stick bait is getting down in the mud and the dirt and the gunky stuff in the bottom of the water, and I'm picking it off all the time. So I go, all right, well, let me switch to something else. The Christy Crawl, the little crawdad, weighs a little less. So I'm throwing in the same place I'm throwing that stick bait, and I'm doing the same stuff. And when I'm popping it up and I'm moving it, these back claws will flutter in the water and get some bass's attention as well. So it's great for letting it sit still like a stick bait, and it's good moving that bait and hopping it around and stuff. But it's getting less gunk on it, so I'm catching a lot more fish on it right now when I go out to fish. So right now, that's probably my best bait right now. And yeah, it's just like the stick bait. I probably prefer a little bit faster reel, but I can make this work. You know, I can make it work just like I made it work when I fished with even slower reels when I used to fish this sort of thing on spinning reels. So after crawdad, let's talk about, I don't know if y'all can see that, but it says moho rig. The moho rig is good in grass. The weight will get down in that grass, and then that line will then go. I like to do a 2-aught extra wide gap hook. We're still on those baits. This is the last one for those extra wide gap hooks. I like it on an extra wide gap hook. And I'll put like a floating worm, like one of these little Zoom trick worms. You know, I like to put something like that on there. I'll put smaller stuff on there sometimes too. I like fishing with the extra wide gap hooks. You can also use, thought I might have one nearby, an offset shank worm hook. So this is also Gamakatsu. So they have like nice little thin wire hooks that you'll be able to penetrate the fish with this setup. So those offset shank hooks, usually people use them for worms because worms are so thin, you don't need an extra wide gap. But I just find I set the hook better and land more fish with the extra wide gap. But in really clear water, I might get less bites with the extra wide gap compared to that offset shank worm hook. So keep that in mind. If you like both hooks or you like the other hook, use that hook for the worms, the thin worms. The thicker plastic baits, you're going to want to use the extra wide gap. But you can get away with this on the moho rig. I prefer the extra wide gap, and I can bury that hook because I'm fishing it in grass usually, the moho rig. And I'm not going to go into details about the moho rig. That would be a whole nother video. Let's move on. I think you get the point that you can fish these 4 baits with the 2/0 extra wide gap hook. Now let's move on to other baits you can fish with this setup. That's right, the Ned rig. You can fish a Ned rig on this. Honestly, you can fish a Ned rig on like any setup. You would be surprised. You know, depending on how big that hook is, you know, because there's Ned rigs that are giant, that Gambler Baits makes a giant Ned rig that's for, you know, fishing down here in Florida and the bigger vegetation and what have you. You're going to need a bigger rod and stuff for that. But, you know, your average small Ned rig, you don't need a ton to set the hook on those bad boys. So this will work fine for that. So a Ned rig is great. It's not the first thing people think of, especially down here in Florida, is, oh, you can fish a Ned rig. But I have a lake that's near me that it's decent size for a bank fishing lake. You can walk around and fish from the bank. There's a lot of rocks there. It's really fun to fish a Ned rig there. There's some big bass in there. I've caught some really big ones. And I've even tied on a Ned rig with a weed guard and fished it on much bigger rods. But you can fish your average Ned rig on this setup. And Ned rig catches a lot of fish. Not always the biggest fish, but a lot of fish. You can catch a lot of fish on a Ned rig. So let's move on. So a prop bait. So think Whopper Plopper, Berkeley Chapo. Guggen has the Guggen Revolver. That's a little bigger one, but it will work on this setup. Mock Baits has the Mock Baits Patroller 90. I have caught giant bass on all of those. I love throwing prop baits. This is probably one of the best setups for prop bait. My personal best, my biggest bass I've ever caught, absolute behemoth. Actually, every time I like have a new PB, a new topwater PB, in the last like 4 years, it's been beaten by a prop bait. Like I'll catch it on this prop bait, then a year later I'll beat that PB and catch it on another prop bait. So you can catch absolute giants on a prop bait. And here's one thing about a prop bait. My biggest bass I've caught on it is when I'm not reeling fast. I used to use faster reels on the prop bait. Okay, so prop bait's really interesting. It's a treble hook bait. I got one around here. Where is it? Oh, here's a Guggen Revolver. And this thing spins around and chugs up the water. Usually the prop that spins around is at the back. That's the one thing that's different about the Guggen Revolver. This is actually one I found in the water. You can see it's all beat up and dirty and nasty. I was fishing one day and I was like, is that a Guggen Revolver? And so like I fished it out of the pond I was fishing, and I never did clean it. Oh, it's actually chipped over here, broke in the back. Okay, well, that's probably not the best example of a prop bait, but that bait actually does work well. Who knows, that might have been sitting in that pond for years before I found it. But, I mean, prop baits, you will get slammed. And I used to fish them on faster reels because what would happen is you can fish so many techniques on a rod like this. And here's the great thing. Usually topwater baits you want to fish on braid or monofilament because it floats. Well, this you can fish on fluorocarbon, and fluorocarbon is what I usually use for most of my fishing techniques, including all these other ones that I've talked about. So if I'm fishing fluorocarbon for most of my techniques, and I'm fishing with this rod and I'm fishing a stick bait and I'm not catching them, I see something bust topwater, I go, oh, I'm getting out the prop bait. I can cut my line off, tie on a prop bait, and chuck it out there. I don't have to go get another reel. I don't have to put on another line. It's really nice. So prop bait might be the best bait out of all these. And what I was trying to say before I got distracted was my biggest bass I've caught on a prop bait is when I'm like really fishing it slow, just barely chugging up the water, just fast enough for that prop bait to be working and chugging up the water and pausing it and stuff like that. I'll get slammed. And here's the other thing is, especially the pros, they always tell you to not straight retrieve, not just chug it all the way back to you. It works. It depends. It depends. Experiment with your different retrieves, but there's so many times that I've caught bass where the way I had to catch them was a straight retrieve and maybe like one pause during the retrieve. My PB, my two biggest bass I've ever caught topwater were on straight retrieves. Now, is it because I don't do pauses? No, I do. I do. Like I literally, my PB was caught when I think I paused it at the beginning of the retrieve, and then like I started retrieving it straight back, and like 5 seconds after I had that pause, I got slammed. But I think like the cast before that was in the same spot, and I was pausing it and pausing it and pausing it. So then the next time I'm like, I'm just gonna just wind it just slow enough. I'm just gonna keep it steady and just slowly, and I got absolutely destroyed. So don't be scared to straight retrieve, but also mix it up. You'll get better at that if you're new to fishing a prop bait, but if you're not, then I don't need to tell you anything. So what's after prop bait? A chatterbait. So a chatterbait. Prop bait is topwater, so it's gonna be the most fun, but I don't know, chatterbait might be, maybe chatterbait's the most fun. It's between prop bait and chatterbait for sure. They're both big bass catching baits, and you can fish them on this setup, a cheap setup. That's great. And so a chatterbait. You're gonna wanna fish chatterbaits not just in the grass, okay? So I actually don't wanna fish like in really heavy vegetation with a cheaper reel, cheaper rod. I really don't, but you can. Especially a chatterbait, because a chatterbait, you're gonna hit that grass and you're gonna pop it out. You're gonna tick that grass, pop it out. Tick that grass, pop it out. I mean, you can put it down in that grass and really rip it up out. I'm probably not gonna fish it that way on this setup, because there's gonna be times where I really get stuck in that stuff and then I'm winching out like a ton of vegetation. I don't wanna do all that. If you're just barely hitting that grass and ticking it up. And here's the other thing, a chatterbait works great everywhere. It doesn't just work in vegetation. It doesn't just work when it's windy and there's ripples on the water and there's cloudy overcast, or when it's muddy. But it does work really well in all those situations. When the water's dirty, when it's hard for the bass to see in the water, like on a cloudy day, or when it's windy and there's ripples on the water, it changes how the light comes through the water and how well they see in the water. So they have to use other senses, you know. So when you have a vibrating jig or a chatterbait, it's buzzing, it's vibrating, so they can detect that and they'll go after it. And so I'll go also around thick grass and vegetation, a weed line, or even like a bunch of just grass along the bank. If I'm in the kayak, I'll be parallel to that stuff and I'll fish a prop bait along that edge, or I'll fish a chatterbait down in the water along that edge. And that vibration or that sound from those two baits will pull bass up out of that stuff. Like my PB prop bait bass, there was actually a tunnel, and that bass, I know it had to have come out of that tunnel to get that prop bait, because it was too big of a bass and too shallow of an area except where that tunnel was. So it had to have come up out of there and slam that prop bait. So you'll get bass to come up out of that stuff for baits like prop bait that make noise and chatterbaits that make vibration. So just want to point that out. And there is a chatterbait. That's the original chatterbait, 1/2 ounce. No, this is a 3/8 ounce. So this is probably your best bet when you're actually around vegetation. I prefer fishing the 1/2 ounce when I go to ponds and it's not a lot of vegetation and it gets a little deeper and it's open water. So I have a lot of 1/2 ounces, but when I'm in the kayak and I'm out on lakes and I'm doing a little stuff a little bit differently, I usually go towards that 3/8 ounce is what I've come to find out. And then is a lipless. So a lipless crankbait. So here's a cotton cordell. You can find these at Walmart for a couple bucks and they're actually good. So this is a 1/2 ounce, but these baits are kind of like the chatterbait. You're gonna wanna fish them around vegetation, more so than even the chatterbait. These are meant to be ripped out of the grass, okay? So you're gonna hit some grass and you rip it up out. Now, will it only work in grass? No, it will work other places and near grass as well. And so it has rattles in it. So it makes noise just like that prop bait, just like the chatterbait makes noise, vibration. There's some noise affiliated with this. So you can fish it similarly than you would fish those other baits. Now, what's the big difference about this? It has treble hooks and you're meant to fish it in the grass. So you will get fish that react when you rip it out of the grass, okay? So if I just put my rod here, but you know, a good pop out of it, if you hit that grass and you pop it out, if you find that's not working, if you're just popping it out and you're getting caught in the grass and you're pulling a bunch of grass back with you, what you're going to want to do is the old Mike Iaconelli, and actually that's fitting. This is an Abu Garcia, old Mike Iaconelli. He's the old Abu guy. So you're going to want to do the old Mike Iaconelli technique, and that's it. You're going to pop it, okay? So when you hit that grass, you go pow. And I'm trying not to make the rod tip hit the roof, the ceiling in here, and so you're going to bam. So you hit that grass, bam, and you just bam, bam, and you just make sure you pop it up out of that grass. And that's usually when you're going to get hit. So you want it to hit the grass, but at the same time, you don't want to like get it caught on the grass. So as soon as you feel that, you pow, you pop it out. Pow, you pop it out. And that will get you some fish. When they're chasing bait fish in a pre-spawn, and then after the spawn, there's a period of time when they're kind of in transition, and then there's a period of time when they start really chasing bait fish. And that's when it's fun catching them on a lipless, and in the pre-spawn when they're chasing bait fish. Those 2 times. And then in the fall, they're chasing bait fish. There's quite a few times. Really, you could probably fish this year round, but it's not going to work as well year round as it will during certain times. But lipless is a great bait, and you can fish it on this. Moving on to the next one. A buzz bait. So another topwater bait. Now what's good about the buzz bait, oh, one of my lights just went out. Okay, no big deal. What's good about the buzz bait is it's a little more weedless than a prop bait, but it's also gonna stir up that water and make some noise. And here's an old buzz bait. There you go. Has that guy right there. And we can make a whole video about tuning that and getting it to hit that wire. If we want it to hit that wire and make noise, and having a trailer hook on it's going to help a ton with catching extra fish. But we're not going to spend all day talking about the buzzbait. But I do want to say it's a great option. And a 7-foot medium heavy fast isn't my #1 option. I like a longer rod with a buzzbait and most baits because I can chuck it further. Now with a prop bait, I can chuck it a mile. Me personally, I can chuck it a mile with a 7-foot medium heavy fast because it weighs ½ an ounce. Same with a lipless. I can chuck that a mile. And I can chuck a chatterbait pretty far too. So 7 foot's plenty for me. Maybe if you're newer, you'll build up to being able to cast it really far, but you don't always need to cast it really far. And that's actually how I'll use this buzzbait. So I'll go fish the river sometimes. I've actually fished the river pretty recently, and I was like, man, I wish I had a buzzbait with me. And so that's how it made this list. Because there's a lot of laydowns, there's a lot of trees that have fallen in the water, there's vegetation up around the edges, there's little kind of canals that go off of the river, but it's so shallow that you can't really go back there, not even in the kayak. But I could come to it and then cast back up in there. But there's a little bit of vegetation here and there, so I feel like if I throw the prop bait, I'm not going to really be able to fish that area very well. But I could throw a buzz bait. I could throw a buzz bait in all these different areas, and because it's smaller, it's a 7-foot rod instead of a 7.3 or 7.6 or 7.4, whatever you like to throw your buzz bait on. Because it's a 7-foot, it's smaller, I can be a lot more accurate. A longer rod you can cast further, but a shorter rod you can cast more accurately. So I can throw it exactly where I want, around tree stumps and cypress trees and around vegetation, right where I want it to, and chug it up around stuff. And so I think a buzzbait could be a big player with me personally on the river with this setup. And a 6-4 gear ratio is great for moving baits because it will keep you making those moving baits not move too fast. So I think this could be really good for a buzzbait. Now there are buzzbaits that you might feel like you need more backbone, or you need to just start setting the hook harder than a 7-foot medium heavy fast action. But that's like anything. You could have some hooks that are just so big and thick. That's why we were talking about the 2-aught. These are the 1-aughts, but we were talking about the 2-aught Gamakatsu extra wide gap is because they're kind of thin wire. You don't need as much rod stiffness to really set the hook home with those. And so that's why I like those, because I actually don't have a huge hook set, you know. Like, I'm not weak, you know, but at this, I don't know why I did that. but at the same time, like, I have kind of a lazy hook set. So it's like, I'm like, oh, there's a fish. Does he still have it? Yeah, he still has it. Bam. I'm not like jacking them. I'm just, bam, I got a lazy hook set is what I always called it. They actually have a term for it, and I forget what it is. But the reason why is because I have tennis elbow. And so, you know, when I'm having a good day and I'm jacking fish and I'm pulling them up out of grass and everything, by the end of the day, my elbow, I'm like, oh, man. And so I've kind of developed where I like to use rods that are a little stiffer than what usually people will use and what have you. And I've gotten to the point where I'm good with my hook sets. I don't lose fish, and I have a lazy hook set and I still don't lose fish. So, you know, it's all how you use everything. And so we talked about the buzzbait. Now I think we're at number 10, if I'm not mistaken. And that one says spinnerbait. And so, spinnerbait, I have always fished the vibrating jig chatterbait better than I have the spinnerbait. And I think it's because I've been using the wrong setup. Because I'll lose fish on the spinnerbait, and I've thrown it on bigger rods that are a little stiffer, and this might even be a little stiff. You know, you want a little bit of tip with that spinnerbait is what I've really come to find out. Now, I have a lazy hook set though. So if I feel that fish, I'll just kind of sweep into him and be like, yeah, there we go, I got him. Now, if I start losing fish that way, then I'll start setting the hook. I'll figure out really how this is gonna play with the spinnerbait. But the spinnerbait, I'm gonna use it kind of the same way I'm gonna use that buzzbait, but not top water, in the water. So those tree stumps, those cypress trees on the river, and even around vegetation, I'm gonna throw that spinnerbait. And because it's a 7-foot, it's gonna get in there nice. And as far as the gear ratio goes, it's perfect. A 6.4 is perfect for a spinnerbait. That is a great, great speed. I always feel like I definitely have too fast of a reel when I throw a spinnerbait on one of my other reels at 7.1 or 7.5 or 8.1. I'm always like, man, I can make it work, but it's a little fast. And I'm like, so now that I'm kind of figuring out what I'm going to use this for, I'm like, dude, spinnerbait speed-wise, it should be perfect for this, because you can really slow roll with a 6.4 gear ratio and just get those blades chugging and turning. And if you're trying to really like move some water, some Colorado blades. You know, I usually go with the willow blades because I feel like it's a little more versatile for just imitating bait fish and stuff. So here's a Booyah one that has a bunch of blades on it. Okay, so this one's like, what I like to call this is a poor man's Alabama rig. So this is supposed to imitate a bunch of bait fish. But I'm sure I have some other ones around. This is another Booyah one. So here we have a Booyah one. And we have two different blades. And there's no skirt on this, but we do have our trailer hook. And actually, here's one still in the package. And there's a Colorado blade on that. The Colorado blade is going to stir up a lot of water. So if you're in muddy water, dirty water, it's shady in the river because there's trees everywhere and the water's dark. And so Colorado blade, just slow chugging it through that stuff. And actually, surprisingly, if you want to just slow chug the water up above grass that's like maybe slightly submerged grass, a spinnerbait can be really good. It can really get those bass to come up out of that grass and get them and get your bait. So spinnerbait could be a key player with this setup also. So there's 10 baits right there. I know this is probably a long video, but I thought it'd be simple to make because I probably already have half the stuff out because I'm organizing stuff. I'll put this combo in the description below. I'll put this reel in the description below. I'll put this rod in the description below. And if you like red handles, I guess I'll put the Black Max in the description below because it's the same gear ratio as this. And I can vouch that it's a good reel. I've actually bought a few of them for my nephews and cousins. And I have one for myself as well that I've had for 3.5 years. And it still works. So yeah, so I am looking forward to throwing quite a few things on this. This is going to get some work, and I'm hoping for it to catch some big ones in my upcoming series. Maybe if people like this sort of video, I'll try to crank out a bunch of these videos before my series starts, because I do have a lot to do to get that series ready to go. And it's a series where I'm going to be fishing a bunch of Florida lakes and rivers. Each video we're going to fish somewhere new, and we're going to catch some fish, and it's going to be fun. Out of the kayak, if you're interested in that sort of thing, or you want to see any of my other videos coming out, make sure you hit the subscribe button and that notification bell so you can be notified every time I post a new video, and of course hit the like button if you like this video. And that's going to be it for today. This video took a little while to do, but I think it was worth it, so I'm out. Peace.